And one of the things that the OWL curriculum teaches youth is the difference between outercourse and intercourse. So we like to talk a lot about broadening the definition of sex, because sex can mean different things to different people. A lot of people think that sex is penetrative intercourse. If there is something penetrating a body orifice, then it's sex. Anything other than that is not sex. And I want to push back against that a little bit, because sex, again, means many different things to many different people, especially, as you mentioned, Jamie, when we're starting to look at or experience queer sex. Because queer sex uses pleasure in all kinds of different ways that may look nothing like what pornography looks like.
Welcome to Jamie's Given Consent. The goal of this show is to introduce you to the people and ideas behind consent culture, empowering you with the tools to disrupt toxic patterns and pursue healthy desires. Today, I'm joined by a somatic embodiment coach, reiki healer, facilitator, and speaker. They're the executive director of Sex Positive Portland, which is part of Sex Positive World. They're an educator with Our Whole Lives and with Erotic Blueprints. They are pursuing getting better education out there, and today I'm so happy to be joined by Averydeane. Thank you for being with me, Avery. So where I think I want to start with you is by starting with Erotic Blueprints, because as you described it to me is that we kind of, you meet a new partner and everything's really great and you have this great sexual chemistry, and a little time goes by and things kind of fall apart. How does Erotic Blueprints help with that?
Yeah, Jamie, thanks for asking. So the Erotic Blueprints were created by Jaya, a woman who has over 20 years of experience in sexological bodywork and other modalities. And the way that the Erotic Blueprints can help us understand our own erotic energy as well as the erotic energy that moves through others, having that deeper understanding of how these things can and do flow through us can help us navigate a little bit better when we're not an immediate match. And like you said, sometimes when we first get into a new thing with someone and everything's really exciting and erotically charged, we can make anything work sometimes when things are that fresh and new and exciting. And then over time, if two people in a relationship aren't on the same page in terms of how their sexual energy moves through them, sometimes those mismatches, if we don't know why there's a mismatch, it can be really hard to bridge that gap. So the Erotic Blueprints help each person understand their own erotic energy and how it moves through them, and gives them some tools and insights into some of the really amazing things about how their erotic energy moves, and also some insight into how some of the shadows or blocks can come up with that particular way of erotic energy flow. And when we can understand that about ourselves, we can be better communicators to our partners about what we need, what works for us, and what helps us get into that space of erotic energy. And then the same thing can happen when we have a better understanding of our partner or someone else and how their erotic energy moves in them, then we're better equipped to help meet them in the ways they need to feel really erotically charged, open, and filled with pleasure.
So with the Erotic Blueprints, would you consider that something that strictly relates to sex, or is it bigger than just sex?
I would say yes, both of those things are true. So I'll answer the second piece first, in that these Erotic Blueprints do manifest in our lives in so many ways. Often how we do one thing is how we do a lot of things. And so having this understanding of our own erotic energy is really kind of a way of also understanding our vital life force energy and what drives us, what moves us, what gives us the energy and access to the energy that we need to navigate the world in ways that feel both pleasurable and ease-filled and fun and sustaining and nourishing in all those ways. The Erotic Blueprints specifically are designed and built as a framework around our erotic energy. So the way that the Erotic Blueprints are taught is very much specific to sexuality, erotics, and pleasure. But that doesn't mean that they are limited in that. That's just the framework and the way in which we teach them and share them.
Mm-hmm. So for the Erotic Blueprints, how many of them are there?
Yeah. So there are 5 Erotic Blueprints.
Okay.
5 core Erotic Blueprints. And really, we all have access to all of these energies. This isn't a reductionist kind of thing. It's really about learning how each of these blueprints move in us and how each of these things exist within us. We have access to all of them, and many of us are kind of most comfortable or most familiar with one of them. So those 5 erotic blueprints, I'll start with the first one. The first one that we talk about most is called energetic. So the energetic type is someone who is actually more turned on by space and anticipation than actual even direct touch or contact. So someone who's an energetic will really like the hover of faces close to one another before the kiss, sometimes as much or more than a kiss itself. These are people who like to think about and plan like a few weekends ahead and think about, ooh, I'm going to get this time with my lover. And they might get to plan out some of the specifics and spend some time really anticipating and getting excited about all the juiciness that is yet to come. One of the superpowers of this erotic blueprint type is that energetic types can have literally full body energy orgasms without ever being touched. And that capacity to tap into that orgasmic energy is not at all limited to sexual spaces. People who are energetics can tap into that orgasmic energy flow through nature, through breath work, through a number of different things. So there's really a lot of access with an energetic if you go in a gentle, soft, spacious kind of way. And that leads me to kind of the kryptonite or one of the big shadow sides or hard parts for an energetic is that an energetic can be easily overwhelmed. So let's say someone comes in for a kiss too quickly or wants to go for direct genital contact in a sexual situation. For an energetic, this can lead to overwhelm and total shutdown. And their system can go like, nope, I am no longer interested in engaging with you because it's overwhelming. And the whole system goes, too much. So there's a delicate balance to be had there. Yeah. The second type that I'll talk about is the sensual type. So the sensual type is turned on most by like full body touch. These are people who might really like deep massage style touch, where an energetic might actually like super light fingertip touch. That might be the most arousing for an energetic person. For a sensual person, they're like, nah, give me more contact. I want more skin on skin. I want more closeness. I want full body writhing around, making out kind of experience. A sensual person is someone who, when they eat a bite of food, you might see them go, You might see a lot of facial expressions with food or beverage that they're really enjoying. Really, a sensual person taps into pleasure through all 5 senses, is kind of their primary way of tapping into pleasure and sensual and erotic energy. One of the cool things about that is sensuals can also have full body orgasm. They can have orgasm through all 5 senses. They can even have orgasmic experiences through food, through sense, through seeing a beautiful sunset. So there's a lot of ways for a sensual person to also tap into that pleasure and erotic energy flow. Now, the challenge or the shadow side of the sensual is that if something is off in any of those 5 senses, if there's a funky smell in the room, if they're not really aligned with their partner's perfume or cologne or deodorant or body odor, if any of those things are not to the liking of a sensual person, if there's a pile of clothes in the corner of the room, that can be distracting for a sensual person. If the lighting is off, if the music is off, these are all things that can get a sensual person up into their head, which makes it harder for them to actually feel into the 5 senses of their body and experience that erotic energy and pleasure. So now I'm going to talk about the blueprint type that most of us are most familiar with, because it's the one that culturally is most dominant. It's the one that we see in media the most, and that's the sexual type. So the sexual type is someone who is really turned on by like just getting straight to it. They want to see naked bodies. They're turned on by direct genital touch. They're also excited about the idea of, okay, when's the climax happening? I want penetrative intercourse and I want a climax and I want that guaranteed. Sexual folks tend to be a little more specifically focused into a one pathway, one route. And the cool thing about that is that those orgasms can be deep and profound and hugely pleasurable. And their eroticism comes to them pretty easily. It's pretty simple to turn on a sexual person. And it's something that many of us are very familiar with. So that's the superpower there. And the shadow side of a sexual person is that sometimes they can be so focused and so goal oriented that it can be harder to experience a more expansive way of experiencing pleasure because they experience it so directly, so easily, and so focused. They can sometimes be so quick to get from 0 to 60 to get to that goal that there's a loss of experience of the pleasure that can be had in between the starting point and that end point that they're seeking. But again, this is the one we're most familiar with because this is the one we see in a lot of TV and movies, and a lot of like romantic scenarios that are presented to us are presented in a very sexual blueprint type way. Yeah. And then next is the kinky type. So the kinky type is the fourth type I'll talk about, and kinksters tend to be turned on most by something that is taboo. So something that is naughty or a little bit outside the box, so to speak. And that can be different for different people. So not every kinkster is turned on by the same thing. There's lots of different ways to explore in the realms of kink, as you well know. One of the superpowers of the kinky types is kinky people can reach altered states of consciousness through these kinds of kinky play and power exchange dynamics, which can be really fun, really beautiful, really incredible. And there's virtually unlimited creativity and pleasure to be had in the realm of kink, because anything you can imagine, you can role play, at least, if not really make happen in real life. The drawback or the shadow side of kinksters, people who are deep in their kinky blueprint type, is shame. We're dealing with taboo as a turn on. Shame is part of that, because things are taboo because somewhere someone in our culture or family or other has said that's not okay. And so with that comes kind of a side serving or a side helping of shame of like, oh, is there something wrong with me? Like, why do I like this thing? I'm not supposed to like this thing. So there can be some work to be done of overcoming those shame barriers to really be able to sink into the juice and the pleasure that's available in that kinky type. And then the fifth type is the shapeshifter. So the shapeshifter type has elements of all four of the other blueprint types. So shapeshifters sometimes want a lot of variety, or they might want just a lot of experiences across the board. Kind of the one of the key hallmarks of the shapeshifter type is a more-ishness, a quality of more. Even though I'm really satisfied and I've just had like 5 amazing climactic orgasms, I still want more. I'm not quite ready to be done yet. I could stop, sure. I don't have to have more, but I want more. And the shapeshifter type wants and needs to be fed in all 4 of the other types for that shapeshifter type to feel fully nourished and fully fed. One of the big benefits and superpowers of this is almost unlimited possibility around sexual pleasure and erotic experience. And the flip side of that, the shadow side of that, is that a lot of shapeshifters can feel like too much, or be told by partners that they're too much, that they want too much, that they're never satisfied, that I can't keep up with you. These are things that shapeshifters hear. And another piece of that is a shapeshifter type is really likely to shapeshift into what works for their partner. And so they might be fed in whatever their partner's blueprint type is, but they might be undernourished or underfed or even starving in 3 of their 4 blueprint types. So that can be a space where a shapeshifter might be having really good sex with someone and might be having a lot of even really satisfying sex and still feel starved and not even understand why they still feel starved. Because if they don't know that they need the feeding in all these different ways, then they can think there's something wrong with them, that they are not satisfied, even though they're having good sex.
Thank you for walking through those.
Yeah.
That's really good, and I resonate with a lot of what you're saying, and I'm sure that viewers are too. I think my follow-up question is, as we're walking through it, I was like, I definitely resonate with that sensual, and I think a lot of people in my life would label me that way from what they know about me. I have a lover that I think probably would resonate more with the energetic. And I know that we both have this assumption that we should be in the sexual category. And we've had lots of conversations around this. Like, What is it when you're like, but we were supposed to want this, so let's go this direction.
And neither of you were that excited about it, right? Neither of you were like, yay, this is awesome. You're both kind of like, yeah, this is all right, I guess. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, right?
How do you help, like, how do you walk people through that to, like, because I also see this with people with their sexuality is the thing I'm supposed to want and the thing that I actually want, and getting people to understand the thing you actually want is not necessarily weird or othering.
Right.
It's simply that's your desire.
Yeah. So that's the biggest piece of my coaching work with clients, whether I'm working with the Erotic Blueprints or one of the other modalities that I use, is helping people get really clear on what it is they actually want, and helping them understand that they're not broken, there's nothing wrong with them, that what they want is perfectly reasonable and okay to want. And the real thing is coming to terms with and accepting our own desires, and then taking the steps to get ourselves fed in the ways that we need to be fed and nourished.
Yeah, I love that. Because I run into it all of the time where, because we don't talk about our sexuality, which is the next piece that I want to talk to you about, is like I was raised in a household where we did not talk about sex things at all. You know, my education as a teenager had to do with getting my period and, not much else, honestly, because it was a religious household. So you walk into a scenario where you start dating later on, you don't know what your erotic blueprint is, or you feel like you can't ask later.
Sure.
Because you're also involved with lifelong sex education. And this is another piece where people go, oh, we can't talk to young people about sex. So how does Our Whole Lives fit into all of this?
Yeah, so Our Whole Lives, or OWL as we call it, is a lifestyle sexuality education program, and it's comprehensive, meaning it's not just teaching young people, or any age really, because there is curriculum for all ages. I focus mostly on 7th to 9th graders is where I've done this work the most, a little bit with adults now as well, using the OWL curriculum, but the curriculum is the most broad and comprehensive for grades 7 to 9, so right around that puberty age. And really the point of something like OWL, or any comprehensive lifestyle and sexuality education, is to give young people the tools and the resources and the knowledge that they need to make healthy decisions about their wants, their needs, their values, their boundaries, and how to engage with themselves and others in ways that are actually healthy and life-affirming. Because just as you said, most of the information that we get in our culture about sex is not always healthy and not always life-affirming. A lot of kids' education, even, 20 and 30 years ago when I was that age, but especially now, so many kids have these little computers in their pockets that have like instant access to all kinds of porn. And porn is not a good teacher. Porn is not a great education system for our sexuality or our sexual behaviors. Porn tends to focus in things that are like on the extreme end of things, and doesn't teach tools about relating. It doesn't teach tools about boundaries and consent and conversations about how to navigate in the moment experiences with sexuality. A lot of porn is either scripted or directed. So people aren't having conversations and making decisions in the middle of it. It's all kind of done for them. So there's a lot of things that young people unfortunately learn when porn is where they get most of their information that does not translate into a healthy way of relating with others. I like to say that porn is to real life sex like Indy car racing is to driving around your neighborhood. There are a few of the skills and things that overlap, but for the most part, we're talking very different experiences. If you start taking Indy 500 drive racing skills and bringing them into your neighborhood streets, not good things are going to happen. Same can be said if most of someone's education about sex is through porn, and then they start trying to apply that in their real life dynamics and situations and sexual relating with others. That doesn't bode well. That doesn't build a good foundation for good experience. So I think there's so much value in giving young people the skills, the knowledge, teaching them how our bodies work, how arousal works, what happens in our brain when we start a sexual arousal or response cycle. Because thoughts start changing. Things feel and sound different when you've got sex on the brain, right? So if we don't give young people the skills and the tools and the knowledge they need to navigate that in healthy ways and hold the boundaries that they actually want to hold, even when they're in situations where their brain is like, but that sounds like such a good idea right now. We need skills and tools for how to navigate those things before they show up. Because when we don't have those skills and tools, we make a lot of mistakes, and they're not necessary. If we could just have a deeper level of education, we wouldn't need to make all those mistakes ourselves as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. This is reminding me also, I had the opportunity to go talk to young people in about the same age group who identified as queer in one way or another, and one of them was asking me about sex and sexuality, and specifically girl sex, because they were a lesbian and exploring that. And breaking down communication to be like, well, talk through like just the touch before it gets to the sex. Like, do you like how I'm doing this? What would make this better? And giving people communication skills, and on top of it, an understanding like, this is this risky, this is this risky, this is this risky, and why it's that risky. Because we tend to make it a binary with young people, or at least it was when I was young. It was like, this is all bad. When it was like, making out is not as high risk as having sex. Like, hand sex is not as high risk as full-on sex. Like, there wasn't an understanding and that basis of knowledge given to me. So I love that work, because young people, they need the skill set.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are not things that I was taught as a young person either, and I got to stumble through learning a lot of those things on my own, and a lot of those lessons I had to learn the hard way, unfortunately. About consent and how and when to say no, and what no really means and looks and sounds like, and how to get someone to negotiate away from a thing they want that you don't want towards something that you actually both have a yes for. And one of the things that the OWL curriculum teaches youth is the difference between outercourse and intercourse. So we like to talk a lot about broadening the definition of sex, because sex can mean different things to different people. A lot of people think that sex is penetrative intercourse. If there is something penetrating a body orifice, then it's sex. Anything other than that is not sex. And I want to push back against that a little bit, because sex, again, means many different things to many different people, especially, as you mentioned, Jamie, when we're starting to look at or experience queer sex. Because queer sex uses pleasure in all kinds of different ways that may look nothing like what pornography looks like. But teaching young people the differences between intercourse, which does involve penetration of a body orifice, and outercourse, which does not involve penetration of a body orifice, and the differences in the risk profiles there, and giving young people the skills and tools they need to still engage with themselves and each other around their sexual energy. Because let's be clear, what teenager is going to completely abstain from all sexual behavior? There may be a few of them, but not very many. So let's give people the skills they need to have those communication tools, to be able to speak to each other about this, to make these smarter decisions about maybe postponing some of the riskier behaviors for a time when their bodies and their minds are a little bit more developed, but give them the skills and tools they need with these less risky behaviors, that they can still explore what this energy means and looks and feels like to them in healthy ways with good boundaries and good communication.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And on top of all of this, you're also involved with Sex Positive Portland, which is even more of this. So I'm curious, because we do lots of exercises, because a lot of times people ask me, like, well, how'd you get so good at setting boundaries? And I do not assess myself as great at setting boundaries. I teach it because I'm bad at it. So yeah, it's the practice. And the practice comes through organizations like Sex Positive. So, like, how did you actually end up in the position of being the leader, the executive director of this group, and why was that important to you?
Gosh, Jamie, how much time do we have? Let's see. For me, coming into this experience, like, I've known since I was a teenager that sex is really important to me. It's a really big piece of my expression of my life force energy, my vitality, my fullness. And when I'm well nourished in that side of myself, the rest of my life is just so much more fun and playful. I have so much more bandwidth to navigate and manage all of the day-to-day stressors of life. So I knew probably sometime in my early 20s, when I was really coming into myself as a sexual being, I realized that I wanted to work in this field. I wanted this work to be part of my life, and I wanted to help more people explore themselves in these ways and deepen into their understanding of their own capacity for pleasure and what pleasure can offer us as a tool and a resource to resource ourselves to be able to navigate the world. And so I was kind of peripherally involved with Sex Positive Portland for a couple of years. I went to Polytopia, which was I went to 2 versions of Polytopia 2 years in a row, which is a weekend kind of conference that SPP, Sex Positive Portland, put on a few years back, pre-COVID, before all of this, to give people an immersive experience into workshops and learning around polyamory and non-monogamous relating and what that can look like. That was kind of my first tap into the organization of Sex Positive Portland. And then I built some friendships, and I was friends with some people who were part of the organization. And then eventually I decided to become a full-fledged member myself. And it was not long after becoming a full-fledged member myself that I saw the job opening posted for executive director. And when I first saw it, my heart was like, oh, and my head was like, are you kidding me? You're not. You do not know enough to do that job. You are not deeply steeped enough in the community. You don't know enough people. You don't have the relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And then a couple weeks later, when I saw the second job posting come out for that job, I was like, all right, well, I'll just apply and we'll have a conversation and see what happens. And it turned out there was someone who had a lot more experience than I do in these worlds who was willing to do some mentoring with me as a young leader in a position like this. And so we had a really great experience of doing some co-leading for a few months, and it has been working out reasonably well. There are, I think there are some good things that I'm doing, and there are also some questionable choices that I've probably made, and that's just kind of how the world works. So we're learning as we go.
Yeah, that's excellent. And as you say that too, I think that part of what this community has going for it is that we navigate a very interesting space because sexuality in America in general is this taboo topic. And that means that we are going to get things wrong, and we're dealing with a culture where we've been told to do things incorrectly or to not do it that way, and if you do it that way, something's wrong with you. And I love that this group helps us move through that, move through those shame, or move through things going wrong, and how do we do it better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because just like you said, we're given all this information about what not to do. There are very few sources of information about, hey, this is a healthy way. This is what good looks like. And I think as humans, we sometimes need those examples of what good looks like. We are primates. Monkey see, monkey do. We tend to copy the things that we have experienced or the things that we see out in the world and try them out for ourselves, which can be really great. It can lead to a lot of exploration. But when what we're seeing is unhealthy stuff, we're then mimicking unhealthy stuff, or we are continuing to stay in unhealthy patterns because we've been treated a certain way. And so we then go out and treat others in that same way. And if those things aren't healthy, then we're just kind of digging into some of the same patterns and staying stuck in some of those shame-filled ways that don't actually give us the connection to ourself, our pleasure, our life force energy that feed us and nourish us and make all the rest of this stuff worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to give somebody who is new to all of this, who's like just found this and has heard this for the first time, like a tool or something that they could do like right now that would improve them and move them towards living in that more erotic hell yes place, what would you say to them?
I would say 2 things. I would say, number 1, get to know yourself and listen into your own self for understanding where your yeses are and where your nos are. Because knowing how you actually feel about something inside of yourself is a necessary piece to having good boundaries and having pleasurable experiences. If you don't know what you like, how can you communicate that to someone to ask them to treat you in the way that you want and in the ways that you like, or to ask them to receive the treatment from you that gives you the pleasure that you're looking for? If you don't know what that is, it doesn't matter how good your communication skills are, you can't communicate it. So that I think would be number 1. And then number 2 would be, as you learn those things, keep navigating towards the things you have a yes for, and be willing to be clear and say no to the things that don't work for you. because the more we allow ourselves to stay engaged in things we actually have a no for, it makes our system start to shrink and shrink and shrink until eventually we're like, I don't want to do anything because engaging in that way at all feels icky and I don't like it. So I don't want to engage at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think too, like it's bigger than just the sex stuff. Like
Absolutely.
I know for me, like someone cooking for me, and it does not have to be a sexual partner, anybody who nourishes me well is something that for me is like a big hell yes.
Yeah.
Like it makes me feel cared for and nurtured, and those are feelings that I want to create for myself. And it took me a long time to learn that that's something I could ask for, and on top of it, it's something that people like to do for me. You know, and they're generally clear if that's not their jam.
Yeah.
But it can expand beyond that to how you like to be touched or how you like to not be touched or engaged with. You know, going back to the erotic blueprints of like the type of touch that you might enjoy. And the fact that those conversations are somewhat taboo or filled with a lot of judgment already of like, I know I shouldn't want this, but...
This is where having an opportunity to like play with speaking about those things when you're not in a situation, when you're not in a sexual situation or a situation where there's consequences for how you talk about it, like being willing and able to practice those conversations when the stakes are really low can be a beautiful way to help us get better at having those conversations when we don't have that experience. Because just like you said, we are taught not to talk about these things. We are taught that if a relationship is good and if the sex is good, then it just works and you don't ever have to talk about it and everybody just has a good time and all is well. Unfortunately, that is just not how things work. You might find that once in a while, now and again, there may be connections like that happen out in the world. But for the most part, we've got to work on this stuff. We've got to communicate about it. We've got to be willing to listen in and share and play with those things in a back and forth dynamic with the person or people with whom we are engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before I ask my last question for you, where can people find you and what do you actually offer to the community for what you do?
Oh, that's another long list. So currently right now I'm working on a project with OWL, with Our Whole Lives. A friend of mine and I are doing a 5-session series of sex education for adults, getting adults into a deeper sense of their own sexuality and their sexual expression. Most of the work I do is one-on-one coaching. So I work with folks individually to help them basically have less pain in their lives and experience more pleasure in their lives. And that may be through the erotic blueprints and the realm of sexuality, but I also work with folks through their physical bodies and through some of the brain patterning, our thinking patterns that can keep us stuck. I've got some great tools through a process called accelerated evolution that can help us break free of some of those thinking patterns that keep us stuck. And then I have some great yoga therapy tools that I work with people through their bodies to help their bodies get unstuck. And then through Sex Positive Portland, I do a lot of adult education around consent and boundaries and touch and self-pleasure and other ways of tapping into eroticism. And there's a few other hats that I wear too, but we could be here all day if I try and tell you everything.
Nice. Well, I noticed a general pattern of it being about being true to what works for like your nervous system and your thinking and your brain-body connection, which I am absolutely obsessed with myself. So you mentioned something that was accelerated, and I missed the second word. Could you tell us what that is?
Accelerated evolution. So that's one of the coaching certifications that I hold. And essentially, accelerated evolution is a compendium of kind of psycho-spiritual processing tools that's really like inner work. It's inner work on working on our inner game of how we think about things and the thinking patterns and getting ourselves emotionally unstuck from certain ways of thinking and being so that we can approach life in a way that we have a little bit more groundedness and spaciousness rather than being emotionally attached to certain outcomes and certain things. For example, one of the teachings of the Buddha is about grasping and aversion. So the Buddha says that we live in this world of polarities where we day and night, right and wrong, good and bad, pain and pleasure. And that most of us get really stuck in grasping for one of those polarities and being averse to or pushing away the polarity on the other side. For example, we could say pleasure and pain, right? Even the way that I'm talking, I'm like, yes, let's experience more pleasure and let's try and experience less pain. And if we are too graspy or too averse, we can actually create our own suffering, as the Buddha says, by getting too attached to one side or the other of these kind of polarity dynamics. And one of our tools in accelerated evolution is we learn to balance those polarities and kind of clear the emotional charge that we get. So we clear the attachment graspiness to one, and we clear the sense of aversion to the other, so that we can approach life in seeing things kind of for the fullness that they are, and choose how we engage from a place of mindfulness and desire and yesness, as opposed to that kind of graspy and averse way of engaging with things.
Yeah, I love that. And I know too that when you do that kind of work, like, you feel better, and also you're a lot more functional. Like, I show up better at my job and in my relationships, and I'm a lot more aware of when I'm reverting back to old behaviors or starting to live in a space of judgment, so that I can disrupt those patterns, which is just key to living really a more like fullness in your life.
I believe it is absolutely necessary that we process our emotional stuff. I think we humans, we are emotional creatures. Emotion is part of our experience. And this is another thing that our culture has kind of poo-pooed a bit in my experience, and saying, we should go by logic and ration and reason. And yes, those are important and valuable skills and tools and resources for us to have. And if we don't process and navigate and manage our emotions, they start to bottle up and they get stuck, and then they kind of explode out of us in ways that aren't actually very helpful or even really relevant to the situation at hand, right? Have you ever had that happen where you have this big emotional reaction to a thing and you're like, why am I reacting to this thing? Like, this is not actually that big of a deal. And here I am, my whole system is like, blah. So, so the accelerated evolution tools help us to clear through and navigate that emotional blahness so that it doesn't leak and pop out of us in inappropriate ways at inappropriate times.
Yeah, I'm a big one to remind people, like, you have an amygdala. Like, as much as we are rational and can measure things and can be very, very on point, you are a human having a human experience. However you showed up in this world, you cannot stop yourself from having feelings. And on top of it, that's how your subconscious and your lower systems tend to communicate, because they don't have words.
Right.
And because I'm a big nerd for the brain science.
Yeah, totally. Our emotions, our body sensations, all of these things, it's all information. It's all information that the body and the other parts of us are sending up to those parts of our brain that can do the processing work, the logical, rational, reasoning type stuff. And if we can really allow ourselves to take all that information in without being reactive to it, without freaking out about the fact that emotions are even happening, if we can learn how to take that information in, we can learn how to navigate our lives with more data, more information about what we're experiencing, and we can make better, cleaner decisions, and we can have more sustainable, long-term positive outcomes for ourselves, as opposed to being stuck in repeating the same patterns over and over again that don't work. And we might even know they don't work, but we don't know how to get out of the pattern because we're just stuck in a cycle.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing, is to help people get unstuck out of the ways that they have been stuck for a really long time, and help them open up and see what the possibilities are, so that they can actually start taking those baby steps toward the things that they actually really want.
Yeah. And as you say that, I'm like, I've been there where I had to start acknowledging I was living in cycles, not in brokenness. So if I just changed one thing about this situation, it takes you steps and steps away from that. And it sounds like baby steps, whatever. But the thing is, it builds momentum. And building momentum means you eventually end up in a healthier place, in a place where you're, like I said at the beginning of the show, it's about getting out of the toxic patterns. Like, how do we do that? You have to know what the toxic patterns are and then make new decisions.
Yep.
And your nervous system's not going to like it.
Not at first.
And it's still good for you. Yes.
And that's back to the accelerated evolution tools. That's one of the things I love about those tools is they help us relearn how to navigate our emotionality and our own nervous system in a way that creates space for the things that are here to be here without taking us to a place of dysregulation.
Yeah.
Because there is a place, like there's a place of like calm, settled, serene, nothing emotional is really happening, right? And then there's a place of like full on trauma trigger, complete emotional dysregulation. And there's a lot of space in between those two where there's room for emotions to be present, but we can still navigate and be emotionally regulated while having emotions. And sometimes it's hard for people to be in not just the deep polarity of one or the other of those. There's no emotion or there's all the emotion. Like, how do we learn to navigate that space in the middle where emotions can be present without it having to cause a lot of reactivity or exacerbation of conflict, but we can actually work through and navigate those things in a way that we actually become more whole. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I asked you a lot of follow-up questions, but here's my actual last question. Okay. So when talking about like brain chemistry and feeling good and all of these things is like, the world has changed quite a bit over the last couple of years with the pandemic going on and a lot of other things. What are some things people who are listening to this show can do today that will help them to live more embodied and like regulate their nervous system better when it comes to this changing, unpredictable world?
Yeah. So there's an easy answer, but there's a lot more to it than the easy answer. The easiest answer is find what helps you feel more grounded and do it. Mm-hmm. It's really quite simple, but the reality of it is less simple than that, because what works for me to feel grounded might be different than what works for someone else to feel grounded. For example, for me, I really like to tap into my breath because it's a thing that's always here and always with me. And if I can find my feet on the earth and take even just like 3 long, deep breaths, I watch how my nervous system relaxes a little bit. I'm not bracing so much. There's less tension in my body, and I'm able to navigate then and approach whatever the situation is from a slightly calmer, more grounded place. That can be a challenge, though, for someone who, I'll use myself as an example. 10 years ago, tapping into my breath actually made me feel more anxious. So I didn't have that as a tool and a resource. I had to find other ways. Hugging a tree was really helpful for me in those moments. I needed something kind of outside of myself because I hadn't yet learned to find any safety inside of myself. My young life experience was such that inside of myself was not a safe place to be. Being in my body was not a safe place to be. And so I had to do a lot of work to navigate and build that safety for myself before I could call on those internal resources as a place of safety. So what works for someone might be finding an animal friend, a dog or a cat or another familiar that can sit with you. If that helps you feel more grounded, great, do it. Going and getting a glass of water, taking a walk around the block outside. Nature is a common way that people find more grounding and more resourcing. Movement is another way that a lot of people find grounding and resourcing. So going for a walk, going for a jog, finding a way of tapping into body movement. Maybe it's exercise, maybe it's not, but tapping into body movement in a way that helps expel and give a place for some of that charged energy to go, so that it's not just sitting in the system and making us tense and nervous. And then I
love it. And as you say that, I'm like, I'm going to go for a walk after this interview to realign myself for the next part of the day. Yeah. What was the last piece?
There's 2 things. One thing is going for those walks. I love to think about monkey feet, because that helps me ground into and be more aware of my feet. So thinking about my feet as if they're like another set of hands, like they could grip, they could grab. And when I walk in that way, that helps bring more embodiment into my whole body. It helps bring my awareness into my physical body, which again, if that's a place where you find safety, that can be a really powerful tool for regulation. If it's not a place that you find safety, let that one go. And then I have one last tool that I can share that works really well for a lot of people. And I've heard it described as the 5-finger countdown. So if you feel yourself getting into a place of overwhelm, of emotional dysregulation, it's a way to tap back into our 5 senses that help bring us back to the present moment, which again, for some people can be really valuable. It doesn't work for everybody. So don't worry. If this doesn't work for you, there's nothing wrong with you. But those 5 senses are: look around, and what are 5 things you can see? You don't have to do anything with them, just name. There are 5 things I see. I see a plant, I see a cat, I see a pillow, I see a water bottle, I see a laptop bag. Great. Those are 5 things I can see. And then what are 4 things that you can hear? The sounds of 4 things that are present in the space around you. And maybe silence is even one of them if it's a really quiet place. And then looking at 3 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So you're looking at all 5 senses and kind of counting down to bring yourself back to the present moment reality. Because for the most part, what's actually present in this one moment is not as threatening as the fears and the thoughts that we like to cycle through in our mind.
Nice. Thank you for those tools. That's great. Thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I got so much value out of it. For anybody who's watching the show, please comment, like, and subscribe if this is something that was helpful to you. And until next time, love you more. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you want to see more, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that we end up in your feed. If you got something out of this personally that was helpful to you, also please leave a comment below. I love hearing the feedback about what's working and what's not. That's what makes this show better. And until next time, love you more, and we'll see you then.